L'écologie du vivant s'intéresse aux interactions des êtres vivants avec leur environnement partagé. Cet axe entend questionner notre façon de cohabiter dans le monde avec d'autres formes de vie, en offrant des mises en perspective inspirées des pratiques collectives qui fondent leur action sur les dynamiques écologiques, de conservation et de préservation, de durabilité et de justice sociale dans un contexte mondial de crise climatique. Comment les êtres humains, qui ont à la fois un impact sur leur environnement naturel, tout en étant façonnés par ces derniers, cohabitent-ils avec les espèces et les écosystèmes? Il ne s'agit pas de lister les conséquences endémiques du changement climatique et des impacts anthropiques, mais plutôt de mettre l'accent sur des exemples de pratiques communautaires qui tendent vers une gestion des ressources naturelles équilibrées en réponse aux besoins des populations et non d'une économie surproductive, extractive, tout en préservant la biodiversité et en respectant les autres formes de vie. Nous allons commencer aujourd'hui par un discours d'orientation mené par Devine Woodlands, artiste visuelle, écrivaine et éducatrice enseignante. Son panel porte sur les luttes pour les zones boisées, un argument en faveur de l'équilibre et de la survie dans les Grands Lacs. En partant d'une brève description géologique et géographique de la région des Grands Lacs en Amérique du Nord, dont les territoires des peuples Wendat, Anishinaabe et Haudenosaunee, Devine décrit l'expansion progressive vers l'ouest des puissances coloniales dans les régions boisées de l'est de l'Amérique et ses effets sur les cours d'eau, la flore et la faune de la région. Bonnie utilise des images et des vidéos, des installations pour montrer comment les concepts des peuples autochtones d'Amérique du Nord concernant le territoire, les relations entre humains et non-humains, ainsi que les conceptions traditionnelles de nos responsabilités mutuelles à l'égard de la terre et de l'eau continuent d'affirmer une position protectrice et réparatrice de nos jours. Je vais vous lire sa biographie, et c'est Marie-Hélène Pereira, notre conseillère à Material Compagnie et ancienne directrice, qui est aujourd'hui commissaire en pratique performative au AKV, qui sera sa répondante. Bonnie Devine est une artiste visuelle, écrivaine et enseignante, née à Toronto et élevée en tant que membre hors réserve de la Première Nation Anishinaabe de Serpent River, située sur la rive nord du lac Huron. L'œuvre de Devine émerge des traditions de narration et de création d'images qui sont à la base de la culture Anishinaabe. Sa pratique interdisciplinaire combine l'écriture, la sculpture, la peinture, la vidéo et la performance pour explorer les questions relatives à la terre, au traité et à l'histoire. Bien qu'elle ait reçu une formation en sculpture et en installation à l'Ontario College of Art and Design et à l'Université de York, c'est auprès de ses grands-parents, trappeurs sur le bouclier canadien dans le nord de l'Ontario, qu'elle a appris le plus de choses. Les installations et les vidéos de Bonnie ont été exposées et collectionnées au niveau national et international, notamment par le Musée des Beaux-Arts de l'Ontario, le Musée des Beaux-Arts du Canada et la Galerie nationale des peuples autochtones d'Amérique du Smithsonian Institute. Parmi les récentes reconnaissances de sa pratique, citons le prix du gouverneur général en art visuel et médiatique en 2021, le prix du patrimoine du lieutenant-gouverneur de l'Ontario et le Distinguished Research Creative Practice Award de l'University of Cat en 2019. Elle a officiellement pris sa retraite de l'Ontario College of Art and Design University, où elle était professeure agrégée et présidente fondatrice du programme de culture visuelle autochtone. Merci Bonnie. C'est à vous, je vous laisse la parole.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to present in English this morning, so I hope that's okay. So this is just the title of my presentation. I want to argue for balance and survival in the territory that I come from, which is the Great Lakes of North America. So this is North America from outer space. We have the wonderful opportunity now to see our land from a new perspective, with new eyes. And I think it's very important because, so I'm going to walk around a little bit. In my culture, in the Anishinaabe, I come from the Algonquian-speaking peoples in northern North America. And we call this territory Turtle Island. You may have heard that term. It was only when we saw our land from outer space that we realized that how apt our stories and our legends and our nomenclature is, because she is shaped like a turtle. For many of these things I'm going to talk about this morning, I'm going to do it in the form of a story, because this is how we most readily communicate the truth of our understandings. So the story of the creation of this place is that there was, before there was this place, there was a sky land, there was a sky world. And there was a young girl who was walking in the sky world, and she came upon a hole in that sky world, and she looked down, and she was so intrigued by it. It was beautiful blue, it was beautiful colors you can imagine from space. This is what she saw. She looked down so much that she fell through the hole and came falling through the sky. The birds saw her falling and realized that she was in danger. And the birds came and circled around her and helped to break her fall. And they bore her on their wings and circled around looking for somewhere to put her, because everywhere was only water. And the animals came up to the surface of the water because they saw this spectacular sight of this woman falling from the sky and these birds circling around to break her fall. And they rose up in the water, and a turtle came and offered his back as a place where that woman could land. And the birds put the woman, we call her Sky Woman, Gishige Kwe, Sky Woman. They put her gently on that turtle's back. And she said, if you will bring me a little bit of earth, I can make a place here. I can make a place where I can live. And there was no land around, there was no earth, only at the bottom of the ocean. So the animals came and said, all right, we'll try and get some of that earth for you. This is the spirit of generosity of those animals. They realized they needed to help her to survive. They wanted to help her to survive. So first, a bear came, and he tried to dive down, a very strong animal. Tried to dive down to the bottom of the water to get a bit of that earth, but it was too deep for him. He couldn't make it. He came up to the surface again and empty-handed. Then another animal came, an otter, very good swimmer, sea animal, a mammal. Tried to dive down, couldn't make it. All the animals tried. Nobody could get to the bottom of the water to get that piece of earth that this woman needed to survive. And then a little muskrat came. The muskrat was not a very proud animal, and it was quite humble and a little bit ridiculous. But when he offered himself, the Sky Woman took pity on him, and she said, of course, if you want to try. All the other animals were laughing a little bit at him because because he was so weak. He dove down, and he was gone a long, long time. And the animals became frightened and worried about him and were looking for him. And they saw bubbles coming up. They realized, oh my goodness, he's in trouble. Finally, after a period of time, his little body floated up to the top. He had not been able to survive the journey down to the bottom of the ocean. And they pulled him up onto the turtle's back with the woman. And she saw he had his hand like this. And she opened his hand, and there was a little tiny bit of earth. She took that earth and she spread it on the turtle's back. And that earth grew. Trees and grass, living things began to grow. And eventually made this place. And this is the Anishinaabe story, that talks about how our place came into being. And it links us back directly to our debt that we owe to those animals. And the way that the animals are intrinsic to our survival. And not only that, but the way that their cooperation teaches us how we are to be together in order to ensure one another's survival. Because of course, once the land was there, the animals were also able to move on to that land and live a different kind of life and have a better kind of existence. Next. So this is the Great Lakes, seen from outer space. Lake Superior, this is Lake Michigan, this is Lake Huron. This part of Lake Huron is Georgian Bay. My people come from that north part of Georgian Bay. It's called the North Channel. And the piece of land in between is Manitoulin Island. Manitoulin Island means the island of the spirits. This is Lake Erie. Here's Detroit. Some of you know Detroit. This is Lake Ontario. This is where I live now, here in Toronto. What do I want to say about this? I think I want to tell you a little bit about the people who live here on the Great Lakes, our traditional territory. We are the Algonquian-speaking peoples. Our language is Algonquian, and linguists now tell us that this is one of the largest in geographical range. It's one of the largest languages in the world. People speak Algonquian languages from Massachusetts. Massachusetts is an Anishinaabe word. They speak it here in Ontario. They speak it here in, this is like Michigan. Michigan is an Anishinaabe word. Chicago is an Anishinaabe word. Manhattan is an Anishinaabe word. They speak it across Lake Superior and out towards the west, out towards the Rocky Mountains. Saskatchewan is an Anishinaabe word. Mississippi, the Mississippi River, is an Anishinaabe word. Now, when I was growing up, I did not know the extent of that language and the extent of the influence that those people had had. I did not really know even that those were my people, that we were connected through our language. Only as an adult, going to university, did I finally crack through the shell of ignorance and the erasure that had occurred in my country, in my, what shall I call it? It's not really my country. But in that enclosed space of colonial modernism. So there are three groups in Ontario, where I come from, that are part of the Anishinaabe Confederacy. There are the Ojibwa. My family is Ojibwa. There are the Odawa. Odawa, Ottawa, has become the name of our capital city. But those are the Odawa people. And the other group are the Potawatomi people. They live in the Detroit, Michigan area. And they allied themselves in a confederacy called the Three Fires. The Three Fires were the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. The Ojibwa are the keeper of the stories. We have scrolls where we recorded in pictograph form the order of songs, the rituals to be performed, the stories and prophecies of our people. So we were called the keepers of the stories because we are image makers. That's my tradition. The Odawa, these are the traders. They were the great canoe makers. They traveled all across the Great Lakes, down the Ottawa River, all the way to the edge of Lake Superior. It's a very short portage from the tip of Lake Superior to the Mississippi River. They would have traveled down the Mississippi River all the way to the Gulf of Mexico and through there to the Caribbean and through there to Mexico. And we now know that this trade route, one of the longest trade routes for sure in North America, and I would dare say in the world, was our tradition through those Ottawa people, those Odawa. And the third group are the Potawatomi, and they are the keepers of the fire. And those people are the ones to whom we look in times of struggle to bring together that spirit of defiance and resistance, and to unite us when we need to. We're not a warrior nation, but when we need that spirit of defiance, we look to the keepers of the fire to bring that to us. What is amazing to me always when I think of these three great fires, the Three Fires Confederacy, is that they survived. I was telling my friend earlier today, until 1950 in Canada, it was against the law to talk about these stories. It was against the law to practice the songs or the dances or the spiritual rituals of our people. You could be imprisoned. It's called the potlatch law. And it was intended to break the economic ties that bound us together, but it had a deeper effect, which was to break our connection to our cultural identity, to each other, and to the lands that we occupy. Just a minute. So, back in 2014, 2015, I was commissioned to make a work for the Art Gallery of Ontario. And I wanted to make a piece that would reflect those three fires. So this is called Anishinaabe. And I based that name from readings that I had been introduced to about the anti-colonial resistance in Africa, and writings about negritude, and this idea that blackness had a cultural significance that had been erased in colonial France and in Europe and of course here in Africa as well. And I thought, this is what is happening to us now in Canada. We're behind the black resistance, I would say, by several decades, probably 30 years. But we are there now. And we now recognize that our cultural heritage can no longer be infantilized in the way that colonial regimes have infantilized and dismissed our cultural heritage in favor of a modernist economic regime. So what I did, just briefly, I went to different areas in Ontario and gathered reeds from rivers. And this one here is from Serpent River First Nation, which is where I come from. So I went to Serpent River. My cousins came and helped. We gathered red willow, and I brought it back to the museum in Toronto and fashioned it with something called seagrass to weave this figure. And as you weave the twigs, they make forms. You know, they begin to respond to the tension of your hands as you are weaving them. And they begin to kind of, I don't know, dance. It's quite amazing. I had never worked with the material before, but we're there in this museum, which is this very colonial, very religious, you know, galleries are religious temples. They have this kind of thing where they tell you what to believe. And I'm there, and I'm thinking the whole time of my grandparents and how they would be so bemused that there I was in the middle of this museum bringing these materials from home to make art. I'm laughing, it's amusing to me. At the time, of course, it wasn't. It was quite serious, but at the same time, it was quite funny. Anyway, so this one is the Anishinaabe. The one over here is from a place called Walpole Island. It's on the Detroit River. And these are the Potawatomi people. So I was interested in making sure that I acknowledge that part. So these are reeds gathered on the Detroit River. And the one in the back is for the Mississaugas, it's for the Odawa. And those I gathered on the John River in the center of Toronto. And it's called Anishinaabe. So, this is a wampum belt. You may have heard that term, wampum. Perhaps not. In North America, it's a very, very common way of identifying for non-Indigenous people to identify a kind of pact that they would make with us. Now, the colonial people that we dealt mostly with the French and the English, when they saw these wampum belts, they thought they were money because they're quite beautiful. They're made out of the center of quahog clamshells. So you have to, it's not a clamshell actually, it's a whelk. I don't know the term for it, but it has a core, a central core, and there's a hole through that core if you remove all of the outer whorls of the shell. And you can thread it. And this is what makes these little tubes. And they're lustrous. They look like pearls, they're very beautiful. And the old people would make belts out of this material. And encoded in those belts were the scripts of agreements. Mostly they were agreements of peace and friendship. So they would be acknowledging that through negotiation, perhaps sometimes through war, we had come to an understanding of how we were going to be together. This particular belt is called the dish with one spoon. And this was made between that Three Fires Confederacy, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee, who were Iroquoian-speaking peoples. They are the Mohawks. There's 6 nations who make up that Haudenosaunee Confederacy. You may have heard of that, the 6 nations. They were a very organized community. They were completely different from the Anishinaabe. They were in a small area, highly socialized, quite urban. They got along really well with the English. They immediately kind of understood one another. If Haudenosaunee people were here in the room, they would be mad that I'm saying this, because they are our rivals. But we realized that if we were going to live together with the Haudenosaunee people, we had to have an agreement that would tie us both through economy, but also through notions of reciprocal ideas of peace, kind of social contract. This is the dish with one spoon. So what it means is, the land is the dish. It's like a great bowl, it's like a great circle. You think of the turtle's back. It's like a great circle, and it's full of everything that we need. Fresh water, fish, meat, all the plants that grow, air, everything that we need is in that bowl. The question is, how are we going to live with that bowl? Are we going to fight over it? In fighting over it, we will destroy it perhaps, and certainly damage ourselves. Or are we going to try to share it? And that's where the spoon comes in. It's only one spoon. It's a big dish, and there's only one spoon. Meaning, when you sit in the circle to use what the dish offers, you have to pass that spoon around the circle from person to person. And each one takes only what the spoon will hold. You don't grab it. You don't put your face in it and eat it up. You don't gobble. You are aware that only what the spoon will hold is your part. More than that, the spoon is not sharp. It has no blade. It has no fork, tines. It cannot stab. It is only there to take what you need to nourish yourself. This they call it a treaty. I'm going to say white people, it's not the right word. The European people considered this to be somehow a legal document. We didn't understand it that way. We understood it as a story, as a part of our ceremonial practices and exchanges with one another that would help us to always remember, oh, right, only one spoon, a big dish, only one spoon. Thank you. So, last year, in the summer, the city of Toronto came to me. They have a festival every September. They call it Nuit Blanche. It's quite, I think they have it in Paris, but many cities have a Nuit Blanche. So we have a Nuit Blanche as well, and it's one night, and artists from around the city are invited to make artworks, and the city turns out, especially now, post-COVID, people are very interested again in participating in this kind of communal art walk through the city. So I was invited last year to make something for Nuit Blanche, and I was given a really quite interesting site to make my work. It's right down at the financial center of Toronto. Toronto is the financial center of Canada, actually. We have the main stock market there, stock exchange. There are 4 banks on each of the corners of the street. It's at the corner of King and Bay Street in Toronto. So the 4 major banks have large office towers right at that corner. And they offered me this place to make an installation. And I thought, wow, it's a loaded space because of its financial and its capitalistic purposes. All of the people who go there to work wear very nice suits. It's a very affluent and busy and self-absorbed part of the city. And I decided that I would make something there that would replicate that dish with one spoon. Because I wanted to bring that notion of sharing and of mutual interdependence into that highly competitive, monetarily focused environment. So I made quite a large, you can see the armature for this space. And what I said to the city was I wanted to go to sites inside the city and gather reeds from the riverbanks. This has often been my practice, is to gather things and then assemble them into structures, similar to the Anishinaabe tubes. Oh, they said, oh, no. We can't let you go and gather. This was sort of a revolutionary idea to them, that I would go and take some reeds. Oh, no. So next slide. I had thought, this is Grenadier Pond. It's in a place called High Park. It's kind of in the center of Toronto. And it's a beautiful spring-fed pond. It's not really a pond, it's more like a lake. But you can see these reeds that they have all around. I thought, oh, this is what I want to do. I'll go the day before Nuit Blanche. I'll gather these reeds. I'll bring them back to the center of the city. And it will be to remind everyone that we live in a natural world. You know, it's not all concrete and glass and, you know, digital trade, foreign exchange, and all of that. It's also this, you know, and this lives here too. Next slide. They just said, no way. We don't have any apparatus in our legislation here in the city that will allow you to go and gather reeds. I said, but I'm Anishinaabe. We have inherent rights here to gather on our own land. You know, it's part of our treaty with the Crown that we can gather on our own land. No. So, when I went down to Grenadier Pond, I noticed there was a kind of plant there. It's called Phragmites. I don't know if you know Phragmites. It's so-called. This is what the city calls it. It's an invasive species, meaning that it survives really well. It's built to procreate. It's built to take over any territory that it comes across. It's a terraformer, meaning that it grows so thickly that within a couple of seasons, it will actually make new earth. So it's gobbling up the wetlands. Oh, the city, when they heard that I said, well, what if I made this out of Phragmites? Their eyes lit up. Oh, you're gonna reduce the number of Phragmites in the lake? I said, well, a little bit anyway, you know, maybe an acre, if I could have that. They gave me a staff. They said, we'll help you to do this. And not only that, they sent an expert on invasive species to teach me how to kill that plant, to absolutely eradicate it. You know, they gave us special tools. I had some Indigenous people and some students helping me to gather that day. They showed us how to drive that blade right into the ground and slash it at the root. And then we had to cut off. You see, it has fronds on the top. These are the seed balls of this plant. We had to carefully cut them all off, and there was an inspector there to make sure we were cutting off all the seeds of that plant so that we couldn't take it to the center of the city, because the last thing they wanted was for this plant to propagate inside the center of the city. So they made sure that we had entirely eradicated and emasculated that plant. They even gave me a map. This is also from space. I thought it was so interesting how they give us this perspective from above. And here, the little purple areas are where those Phragmites lived. And they said, okay, we'll meet you on that day, the day before Nuit Blanche, and we'll have a group from it was called the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority. They will meet me there. We brought a truck, and I had my Indigenous students, and we cleared most of this area here of Phragmites, and then brought them back to the financial district in Toronto. And this is us making that braid. And the back there is the wall of the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. On the other side, across the street, is the Toronto Dominion. These names are so full of unexplained, unexamined, unconscious memories of conquest. Bank of Toronto Dominion Bank. On the other side is the Royal Bank of Canada. And then on the other side, a less innocuous name, the Bank of Nova Scotia. They all are redolent of Canada's colonial history. And I thought, wow, and here I am, bringing this unwanted species here, something that the city itself has decided is unwelcome and invasive. And I thought, it happened just by chance, not by chance, that this metaphor has unfolded inside this work without my intention, but as a profound lesson, I think, of that dish with one spoon. Next slide. So this is it. That night, so we built it during the day, and then that night, they actually, it was quite beautiful. They lit it, and we had performers. We had a number of storytellers come, a historian, a poet, and a dancer. And over the course of the night, they performed. And it was called A Circle of Inquiry for A Dish with One Spoon, because I wanted it to be for Torontonians to come and say, what is this dish with one spoon? What does that mean? And that we would get to reiterate and re-narrate that story in different voices throughout the evening as a kind of antidote to the incredibly toxic environment that we were in. So this is an antique map. It's called the General Chart of the Great Lakes. It's from the 1800s. It's from the University of Toronto Map Room and Archive. They have a marvelous collection of antique colonial maps. And it's open source, so I can download maps, and I have done this a lot in my work, and reproduced them or played with them or reconfigured them or juxtaposed them with other works. This is a survey map, so they're beginning already in this time to divide the land into parcels and apportion it for sale and monetization. But what I like about it also is that it shows the watershed that sits at the center of North America, which I consider to be the heart and lungs of the continent. So next slide. So this is a rendition of the Great Lakes that I made at the Art Gallery of Ontario back in 2015. And it's called The Battle for the Woodlands. And I render, I don't know if you can see, people who live in Ontario recognize this configuration of waterways immediately because it's imprinted on us from an early age, from the old maps that we study in school. But these 5 lakes, of course, are emblematic of my part of the world. What I wanted to show in using these these maps was the way that the Great Lakes have been militarized by various colonial forces. So all around the Great Lakes are forts. And they were established sometimes in the 17th and 18th century, but even though they're old, they are still active today. So everywhere on the Great Lakes where you see a connecting waterway, the Sault Ste. Marie at the north, Detroit is here, York or Toronto is here, Fort George or Kingston, Ontario is over there, Chicago is here. I wanted to show the way that the lakes have become this contested, strategic center. But I also wanted to show something else, and that was that the Great Lakes are living beings. They are spiritual beings. They have sentience. They have meaning for us. They are guardians of our lives. They are protectors of our very bodies. If you ever come to my territory, the water that you drink, the air that you breathe, the land that you walk on, all are a result of these lakes. These lakes are us, actually. They are running always. And of course, I'm carrying that now. When I come here, I was there 2 days ago. So yeah, I wanted to render those lakes as spiritual beings. In the Anishinaabe language, we have a way of talking about phenomena, objects, or things. It's quite similar. Grammatically, it's quite similar to French. French has masculine and feminine to distinguish nouns. We don't have, it's not gendered in our language. We have animate and inanimate. So some things, the word for table, for instance, would be inanimate. But the word for wood is animate. The word for tree is animate. What does that mean? It means not only that the word has a different declension when you decline the noun, when you talk about that noun, you use a slightly different ending because that object is an animate being. But it's beyond that, it goes into terms of address. And French will understand this because you have a tu and vous, a formal address, which would be vous, and an informal address, which is tu. Well, in Anishinaabe, we would say to someone who is our equal, tu, you. To something that is not human, but superior to us, we would say thou. And this is how we would address the lakes, the trees, the bear. The bear we call our big brother, our older brother. The animals, the water. These are in a hierarchical order within our worldview that places them above us in wisdom, above us in political understanding. We're still working out how we relate to one another. It's crazy. The bears don't have to worry about that. The water doesn't worry about that. The water knows how it will be in different situations. So next slide. So this was my first rendering of Lake Ontario as an animate being. I was interested in the way Lake Ontario kind of looks like an animal, and so it was very instinctive. I wasn't necessarily going back to my elders and saying, what animal would this be? In many ways, I was developing my own visual language to express this. And a lot of Canadian Anglo people didn't understand that there was not a direct connection between my knowledge and what they would call the traditional or verifiable knowledge of my ancestors, that perhaps I could be an embodiment of something different. This is something we'll talk about a little bit more, is how do we carry on the traditions, and how do we continue to allow those traditions to express themselves in new ways that have relevance or have relationality to modernism or all of that. Anyway, so people would say to me, "You mean you made that up?" And I'm saying, well, no, I didn't make it up, but it came to me in a new form. So the next slide. And then at the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, this would have been in 2022, I tried to do this again. And so I made, this is just a detail of a very large mural, would have been about the size of this wall. But this again is Lake Ontario. And again, trying to say not in words, but in visual language, that the lake is a conscious being, sentient, animate. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bonnie. This was amazing. I think that you've touched on so many points that have great resonance with what we're looking at, this idea of the ecology and ecology of the living. What are the living entities that are there, that should speak, that should be heard, that should exist, that should stand, that we should nourish, maintain, vow allegiance to. I think that in the course of everything you've shared, there are so many connections to a lot of traditions also, from here, from Senegal, different communities, especially I think the Lebu communities that are Lebu, it's a community of fishermen, and they have like this very strong connection to water and land, of course, but like that relationship that you build with the waters of the place you are from. I think I had a lot of resonance here. The Serer community as well, especially the Serer Yominka, and the relationship with water there, and water being this living entity that has memory, that has a history, that has the ability to tell this story, but we have to be able to connect to it and to listen. So, yeah, I think maybe in the course of the conversation we can give more examples. I liked how, the story of the Anishinaabe starts with a woman figure, the sky woman, this woman who's falling from the sky into the water, who's being welcomed by all the water animals, who are really thinking about, welcoming, hospitality, but care mostly. Okay, they want you to survive in this place, and they want to put all the efforts necessary for you to have a land to live on, to be able to survive. And the one turtle that sacrifices himself in order for her to have a beginning of a land, that the only one that actually managed to bring a little bit of earth, but that little bit of earth is the seed that was planted in order to have the Great Lakes and everything that it holds. So I think it's a very strong story that speaks a lot about that idea of living together and us, each living entity being accountable for the life of the other. I also very much enjoyed like the whole storytelling and the way in which, for instance, you talk about this idea of treaty making and how do we come to an agreement of sharing the land, being part of the land together, dish with one spoon, that idea of dishing, taking from, but it also implies a return, a reciprocity. So taking from but giving back. A single spoon, which then erases greediness in a way. That's the idea. Okay, let's all nourish ourselves from this land, let's nourish it back, and let's not be greedy. Let's think about each other and let's leave space for each other. I like the circularity of it. So the single spoon for all, which means that we all nourish ourselves at different moments, so that the notion of time there becomes very, very interesting. So how do we relate to time, and how do we relate to time in its circularity? And the circularity is not just like a physical or geographical circularity. I think it's circularity in terms of different generations that will have to nourish themselves from that same dish. So I think that was also strong to think about. So when we say ecology of the living, we have to also inscribe that in a certain time and with different timing, so that that living is a living that becomes living for different generations. The one that passed, the one of today, and the one of the future. Also on cartography, like the colonial maps are full of gaps, we know. The colonial maps are maps that serve the purpose of the colonizer. And I think that more and more we are being conscious of the need to make new maps that would show the existence of all the beings of this world, of this planet, of the cosmos. And I think that in your practice, cartography is a form that is translated in so many different ways. So the map itself, so as you've shown in the images, but I think also, like the storytelling, you spoke about different ways in which the stories are told, through dancing, performativity, through music, sound, through the wood, through different bodies coming together and experiencing this together. So I think the map then expands from being like a physical map, a imaginary map, but being like a larger map in which you cannot just put everything in a drawing, So the drawing, like drawn map, becomes activated, and it gives a reference to a whole plethora of memories that actually complete it. So they exist together. I think maybe my first question is would be related to dish with one spoon and like the politics of treaties and treaty making, especially knowing that when we look at it in the frame of the Anishinaabe traditions and other indigenous communities traditions, the idea of making a treaty came with a common purpose in terms of us wanting to exist together without necessarily looking at taking profit from. And I think that if you look at it further, like during the colonial conquest all the way to now, I think the idea of the treaty has been biased. Like it's been, it failed. It failed because the treaty as it was imagined in the indigenous traditions is not what it is today in a capitalist world. So I think my question is for you to tell us more about that idea of treaty making and how it unfolds today, in the capitalist world.
Thank you. The first treaties that were made between indigenous peoples and colonizers in North America, from the indigenous perspective, were peace and friendship agreements. So they had everything to do with how can we survive together? Only through peace. How can we get to peace? It is through sharing, through understanding our mutual dependence on this earth, on this place where we have landed. So the first peace and friendship agreement happened in Nova Scotia, which is the easternmost point, just as Senegal is the westernmost point of Africa. Nova Scotia is the easternmost point of North America. So it was the first place where Europeans landed. And the first agreements were also wampum belts that were exchanged by the Mi'kmaq and the Wampanoag people, also Anishinaabe people, who greeted those people who came in boats across the Atlantic. It was clear right from the beginning that the English, this was the English John Cabot, didn't understand the nature of the belt that was being exchanged. Because it was lustrous, I mentioned it was made out of these shells, and looked valuable. Of course, it was valuable, but it was valuable in a sense that was not monetary. To the Anishinaabe, it was a document. It was a text. It included visual language that explained and it inscribed historically the relationship between the two recipients of the belt. This was completely lost on the colonial, I believe, and I should say, this is my interpretation now, and I speak out of a certain amount of rage. So I will say that they did not understand. It may be that they intentionally misunderstood, or it may be that these notions were simply outside their political language, their political discourse. The notion of sharing or of welcoming was outside their ken. And what instead they saw was that there was an exchange of valuable object for something that was equally valuable to them, which was land. And so over the centuries, since these very first treaties were made, we have considered them to be peace and friendship agreements, and they have considered them to be bills of sale. And they considered that when we agreed to exchange the treaty, we were selling the land. And this is something that continues to create discord between us and bafflement. We are still in dispute with our government in Canada about the meaning of the treaty and about the abrogation of our rights as a result of the exchange of what to us was a peace and friendship agreement. So So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but this is where the root of much of our discontent and my rage comes from, because there seems to be a intentional misunderstanding.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, it does answer the question. I think that there is something that's related to also, like the way in which we let the land speak. That's important to look at here. I know that, I remember from past conversations where you were talking about different indigenous communities that are still struggling, for instance, to have access to water and other day-to-day commodities. And when we look at what you are presenting today, you see that the communities that are the deprived one are the communities who made these lands and these territories. So. The way in which the territories are governed today, of course, are putting forward the capital, and that keeps the communities into a state of, being deprived. But I think it's important to acknowledge the work that many do still to fight. So the rage should be there, and it's important that people witness how that rage unfolds also in practices, in gatherings, in community building, etc. In your biography, you didn't put this, but for me it was important that we bring it here as well, which is, like the fight to integrate these stories in academia. And to be able to create spaces of transmission in within the spaces that are furthering the oppression for many. Somebody is the founding chair of the Visual Art Culture Program, the Indigenous Visual Art Culture Program at Oak University. And I wanted you to share a bit about that process, because it's a process of restitution to me, a process in which the quest is to bring in, these stories in there, and to be able to also put the finger on what is being done or what has been done to generations of these indigenous communities.
Thank you for that question. Yes, in 2008, the art school that I went to in Toronto, the Ontario College of Art and Design, hired me to begin to develop a program in Indigenous visual culture. Up until that time, there were 2 courses on the curriculum about Indigenous art. And they weren't really about Indigenous art, they were more Indigenous studies courses. So they were looking at, government structures or language structures or the political conflict that's been going on for 200 years with Canada. So it was mainly an ethnographic or socio-political courses. My interest as an artist was to talk about the visual culture of the Anishinaabe and other polities within North America. And at the time that I began that work, it was the first visual culture program in Canada that looked specifically at the art of Indigenous peoples. So it was a struggle, of course, because I was moving into a very colonial, and it was an institution that saw itself as a liberal institution. And so if I ever called it a colonial institution, they would freak out and become very uncomfortable. And I think that the best way to describe the struggle that ensued is to tell you a story, which was I was writing the curriculum, and I proposed a course. Every course that I proposed had to be approved by the Senate of the university. And they would take it apart. They would wordsmith the course description. They would question the readings that I had made mandatory for the course, the syllabus, and the rubric for. They would take everything apart. That's fine. That's typical in academia when you are presenting new programmatics for study. But one course in particular took 3 years to gain approval. And this was a course that was called Abstraction from an Indigenous Perspective. And I was looking at the abstraction that occurred in, for instance, those wampum belts that I showed you, that I describe as texts, in the birch bark scrolls that the Anishinaabe used in order to record their rituals and songs and legends, and also in petroglyphs and petrographs that are installations on the land. Whether they are land works, mounds, or edifices, or carvings on the rock, or paintings on the sides of cliffs. There's a huge tradition of this kind of pictorial expression all across North America, but notably on the Canadian Shield, where I come from. And I was very interested in describing this as a kind of visual abstraction, because it was not to replicate what one saw, it was to translate what one thought. And that was how I was thinking of abstraction. I thought it was a very important distinction to make. But the school was absolutely furious that I was appropriating the term abstraction, which they believed was a product of New York modernism. It took them 3 years to pass that course. And in the end, the only reason they passed it was because in a meeting with the Department of Fine Arts, I presented it as a human rights issue. And I presented it as a question of social justice. And being good liberals, they immediately responded to that and they, oh, okay, we can do that. Yes. So that's my story from okay.
Abstraction from an Indigenous perspective. You spoke earlier about different traditions that taught you the Anishinaabe community about ways in which one could translate the memory of the land, and in one of the forms was walking. So walking as a way of connecting to the land, walking as a way of remembering the land and what the land has to say, and I extended to then your practice being the channel that allows for that memory to be translated and transmitted. So I was, because we also spoke a lot in the past day about, Fenrir maybe in his keynote spoke about wandering. So wandering as a way of thought, a way of remembering, and then I think then the next step would be the translation of what emanates from that act of wandering, walking, I would say here. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about working as, a way of remembering, but also as a spiritual practice. And I think it connects very well to this question of abstraction. In terms of like that act of walking and remembering not being a rational act for many, but it's more related to the senses and the way in which each body is told to connect to the land. It's not something that you learn from the school, it's something that you would learn from the community and how the community teaches you a connection to the land and all the living beings, not just the land, the plants, the animals, and the waters and so on.
Yes. Wear soft shoes. We call them moccasins. It's an Anishinaabe word. Wear soft shoes so that your feet can feel that earth. Walk slowly so that you can hear, because the land is full of stories and it wants to tell us stories. What we were taught as children is the land loves us. That's why we love the land, because it first of all shows us how it loves us. Well, the way that you find out that the land loves us is by walking slowly on it and listening. And it relates back to the dish with one spoon, because the dish nourishes us in many ways. Not only through the material nourishment that it offers, but through its history, through its being, and through our continuous relationship with it. I can't. It is hard to explain. Wear soft shoes and walk slowly, and the land will teach you.
Wonderful. I mean, even walk barefoot.
Yeah.
And the land will teach you. I think we can take a question from the public if there is. Okay, Mabula has a question. So we have two, Mabula and Mamfatu and Yanisa.
Bonjour, good morning. Thank you so much for your presentation. I just want to, I don't know if it's really a question, but perhaps a comment, just because I want to hear more about what I think is, one of the main issues that might be the issue of language, down to the very example that you spoke about when you were trying to pass this new course and your use of abstraction, and for the impossibility for the board to understand your understanding of abstraction. So down to this very moment, I would like to go back to the initial encounter. That might be, the encounter of all encounters in this modern era. The arrival of Europeans in this, in North America. And so as you said, either the misunderstanding, sincere misunderstanding of the belt, or the way Europeans construed a misunderstanding of the belt. Is it about language only? And language really in a very general approach. Language like linguistic differences, language in terms of, languages as containers of worldviews that made it impossible for those Europeans to grasp the inner workings of that other language that they were encountering. So these were all the questions I have rather than the comments, but I just want to hear you more about that topic, because it seems to be, it is such a crucial historical encounter that I think that we could all benefit from delving into.
Absolutely, and we could talk about this all day. This is why the preservation of indigenous language is so important, because linguists know, and psychologists know as well, if you can't name something, it doesn't exist. And there are many, many concepts in Anishinaabe that do not have a translation into English. There is no English equivalent for some of the expressions that we have, some of the words, some of the names that we give to things that Europeans cannot see, but that our language acknowledges. It has to do, and so we get into a bit of metaphysics here, it has to do with our conception of the universe, how time and space relate, where they intersect, and how we experience those intersections. And we have language to describe these moments and these dimensions that English does not acknowledge, because for them, to speak about these dimensions is a form of irrational infancy. I feel my rage rising. So yes, there is and I believe that it is intentionally protected in English to look with disdain on the things that Anishinaabe, and no doubt every language acknowledges, and so that is why one of the key anti-colonial positions in Canada at the moment is around language resurgence and protection, and this is our primary focus at this time.
Hi, Bonnie. Thank you so very much. This was absolutely incredible. And then everything, the beauty of the art, the way you talk about it, absolutely beautiful. So I have a question, and I don't know if it's a question that artists usually like to answer, but for me it's, who are you creating for right now? I mean, when you are in the lab thinking, who are you making this for? Who are you talking to?
Right now I have in my hand a small bundle of tobacco. I carry it in my left hand. I've told this story already this morning. It connects in that way to my heart. I am not the one who's talking. And as the artist, I am not the one, I am making, but I am not the one who knows what I am making or why. I truly believe that it is spirit that understands what these things are for and who they are directed to. And it sounds very pretentious, and to speak to in European contexts, again, I always feel quite infantilized when I describe this position. But I believe that the positionality of most artists, when they are speaking truthfully, is to disavow the authorship of their work. We are not the authors. We are that through which the music is transmitted. And again, this is, it's not generosity either. I mean, there's a point where you feel like you've sacrificed everything to do it, but it's not. It truly is an act of coexistence. The dish feeds everyone, and so it is nourishing to the artist to allow. It is nourishing in a way I cannot describe, to have allowed something from spirit to be manifest.
Let me tell you, you are not in a space where that will be infantilized. We connect greatly with you here, and I think that the word channel maybe could be the word here. You are channeling, like knowledges and way of beings and stories through yourself as a being, but also through your practice. And I think that when we do it like that, we do it for all. For those who know, for those who don't know, for those who connect because they don't know, and for those who are connecting, for everybody. And I believe you are doing it for everybody. So Alisa and Mama Jour and Obi. And how much do we have? But Alisa was raising her hand when it was 2. Okay, so Alisa and Mama Jour.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this session. It's so beautiful to see how your stories connect with ours so similarly. And you said something that spoke to me. I hope I understood well. You said museums have this religion thing. They tell you what to believe. And when you said that, I thought of something I heard recently. It was an interview of, I don't know if you know her, Mati Diop. She's a movie maker, and she was talking about a recent movie she made about the restitution of objects that were in French museums and that returned to Benin. And she said that museums have this thing of colonizing the imaginaries, like schools. They colonize our imaginaries. And I was thinking, from your story and from your experiences, from your art, how do you think museums, but also public spaces and art in general can help us decolonize our imaginaries?
Wow, I don't know. I mean, I think that is really what we are engaged in trying to find out. It's trying to assist one another and ourselves to develop strategies and methodologies that lay beside the discourse that is offered in the museum or in the academy, to lay beside those an alternative discourse. And when I say discourse, I mean, I don't believe that our traditional knowledge is a discourse, actually. I think it's more of a muscle that is longer than we are, that is through the land and through the water and through us and that muscle flexes at different times. And right now, it feels the surge of our energy. And it is emerging in ways that are completely unpredictable. So how do we respond? I think this will unfold in ways that are surprising and illuminating and scary. And all we can do is what we are called to do. And position ourselves in such a way that when we are called to do it, we have the tools necessary. And it's amazing, those tools come to hand when required. I don't know if I'm answering this question. It's very complex, what you're asking. We are engaged in a renegotiation of, and it's not for us, but it is for the stories that lay at the foundation of our cultures. And we are engaged in the renegotiation of the relationship of that with the master narrative of Europe. And this is a kind of war. And we have to understand that we are being called upon to fight. And that's the three fires. Those are the keepers of the fire. They are the ones who are telling us now, okay, this is worth fighting for, we know why. And we will fight in the galleries, of course, and in the museums and in the academies. But we will also fight in the financial districts, you know? Yeah.
You take the last question, Benjamin? There's a microphone.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais plutôt parler des similitudes, parce que chaque fois que je rencontre l'autre, j'essaye de voir les similitudes qu'il y a entre sa culture et la mienne, au lieu de diviser. Je vais parler aussi, je suis très heureuse d'apprendre que l'inspiration vient d'où. Et de vous entendre dire que c'est quelque chose qui vient d'ailleurs et que vous n'êtes pas prétentieux de le dire, mais ça me rend tellement heureuse et simple, parce que quelquefois, j'ai fait une technique de danse, et quand je vois le travail fait, je me dis, mais que c'est beau, et ça vient d'où? Est-ce que c'est bien moi? Donc, je peux dire que ça vient d'ailleurs. Je peux dire que ma grand-mère était une prêtresse yoruba, danseuse, qui m'a beaucoup inspirée. Et puis aussi, qui est morte, elle n'est plus là. Et quand je suis née, on a dit, Yatunde, elle est revenue. Donc, je vais vous parler aussi de la terre. Vous savez, à l'école des sables, il y a le sable où nous dansons et aussi un plancher européen. Ben, nous dansons pieds nus. Et en Afrique, on marche pieds nus. Et je demande que, dans ma technique de danse, et en Afrique, la terre est le partenaire. Parce que nous prenons l'énergie de la terre. C'est vraiment le partenaire qui nous aide à grandir et à être rempli de cette énergie. Et aussi, le bol. Ben, le Sénégal, nous mangeons dans le bol. Et je dis souvent aux danseurs, il y a d'autres qui mangent vite, d'autres moins vite. Et donc, nous allons partager le bol, comme au Sénégal, en dansant. Ceux qui comprennent plus vite que les autres doivent les attendre. Et nous partageons cette énergie de travail. On ne se moque pas de la personne qui danse moins bien. Nous sommes tous ensemble et nous devons collaborer pour arriver à cette énergie. Merci beaucoup. Ça me rend heureuse et je me sens bien d'être venue.
Mama Germaine gave the words of the end. Thank you, Mama Germaine. Thank you so much, Bonnie. We were saying earlier that we would see, as we go through hearing these different stories, all the connections. Even though we are distant in terms of geography, we are also very close in terms of values and understanding of life, etc. Even in the language, you spoke about this non-gendered pronoun that is used, and the idea of the animate and the inanimate. So in Wolof, you referred to French, but Wolof is actually the main spoken language, the traditional language, one say that, of Senegal. And for Wolof as well, we don't use il and elle as in French. Like we have a single pronoun that's the one used for the people, but also for the plants and for everything that exists and that is alive. And we're talking about the animate and the inanimate. We often refer to, like waters or the trees and all of that. We usually refer to them in plural. So not as animate and inanimate, but we usually say garabi. So the trees. So you would not talk about a single tree, because it exists in connection. We know that the roots are connected into the land. So we refer to them as the cohort of trees, the cohort of plants, the waters of, the different places. And the waters also are referred to talking about different deities, for instance. So the waters are beings that have stories and memory and, lot to teach us. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you very much. This was amazing.